A passenger jet falls from the sky in broad daylight, killing everyone on board. For 3 decades, the families were told it was pilot error, a tragic mistake, nothing more. But documents locked away in military archives told a completely different story. What happens when the truth is more dangerous than the lie? On October 10, 1967, Aeroflot Flight 04 crashed in the mountains of northern Ukraine, near the village of Shelkovo. All 66 people aboard the Antonov and 10 aircraft died instantly. The official investigation concluded that the crew misjudged altitude during poor weather, a finding that stood unchallenged for 30 years. This story matters now because it reveals how Cold War secrecy could erase inconvenient truths, even at the cost of justice for the dead. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, a cascade of declassified files began to surface. Among them were radar logs, intercepted radio transmissions, and internal military memos that painted a radically different picture of what happened that day. What emerged was not just a cover-up, but a systematic effort to hide a military mistake that killed dozens of civilians. Flight 04 departed from Moscow's Sheremetyevo Airport at 9:42 a.m. local time, heading southwest toward Odessa on the Black Sea coast. The weather was marginal but within operational limits. Scattered clouds at 3,000 feet, visibility 5 miles, light rain. The flight was routine, carrying a mix of Soviet officials, engineers, and families returning home from the capital. At 10:14 a.m., air traffic control in Kiev received the aircraft's standard position report. The crew confirmed they were cruising at 19,000 feet, on course, with an estimated arrival time of 11:05 a.m. The captain's voice was calm and professional. There was no indication of any problem. 7 minutes later, at 10:21 a.m., everything changed. Multiple ground witnesses in the Shelkovo region reported hearing a sharp, explosive sound high in the sky. Farmers working in fields saw the An-10 suddenly tilt sharply to the left, its nose dropping as if an invisible hand had shoved it downward. The aircraft began to disintegrate in mid-air, shedding pieces of fuselage and wing as it fell. The wreckage scattered across a forested hillside over an area nearly 2 miles long. Rescue teams arrived within the hour, but there were no survivors. Soviet authorities immediately sealed the crash site, restricting access to military personnel and state investigators only. Journalists were told the investigation was sensitive and would be handled internally. Within 48 hours, the official narrative was set. The State Commission on Aviation Accidents issued a preliminary statement blaming crew error. The pilots had descended too early in poor visibility and struck terrain. The report cited inadequate adherence to altitude protocols and closed the case within 6 weeks. Families were given no further details. The crew members were quietly stripped of their honors. But inside the Soviet military, a parallel investigation was underway. Radar operators at a nearby air defense installation had tracked the flight's final minutes. Their data showed something the public would not learn for 3 decades. Flight 04 had been struck by a surface-to-air missile during a training exercise. The missile, an S-75 Divinar, had been launched from a test range approximately 40 miles east of the crash site. It was never supposed to be in that airspace at that time. The Soviet Air Defense Forces were conducting live-fire drills that morning, testing radar tracking and missile guidance systems. According to the declassified files, a targeting error occurred when the system locked onto Flight 04 instead of the designated practice drone. The missile was launched automatically. By the time the crew realized the mistake, the missile had already left the rail. The warhead detonated near the aircraft's left wing, shredding hydraulic lines and structural supports. The pilots never had a chance to react. The official version, blaming weather and crew judgment, was fabricated within hours of the crash to avoid an international incident and to protect the air defense program's reputation. The first cracks in the official story appeared in 1992, when a retired air traffic controller named Anatoly Gribov published a memoir in a small Ukrainian journal. Gribov had been on duty the day of the crash and wrote that he overheard a frantic radio call from the missile battery commander moments after Flight 04 disappeared from radar. The call was never logged officially, but Gribov remembered the exact words, "We have a problem. Civilian aircraft hit." His account was dismissed as unreliable memory until 1997, when the Russian government began a limited declassification initiative. Among the released materials were the radar tapes from October 10, 1967. Independent aviation analysts who reviewed the data confirmed that Flight 04's altitude and course were correct up until the final seconds. There was no gradual descent consistent with crew error. Instead, the aircraft's transponder signal simply vanished, a pattern consistent with catastrophic structural failure or explosion. The second key piece of evidence came from wreckage analysis that was never made public in 1967. Fragments recovered from the crash site showed puncture patterns and metal deformation consistent with high-velocity shrapnel, not ground impact. The lead investigator at the time, Dr. Yuri Lazarev, had written a confidential note to his superior stating that the damage could not be explained by terrain collision alone. His findings were ignored, and he was reassigned to a research position far from Moscow. In 2001, a former missile battery officer named Sergei Volkov gave a videotaped interview to a Russian documentary crew. Volkov had been stationed at the test range in 1967 and confirmed that an accidental engagement occurred during the October 10th exercise. He described the panic that followed, the immediate arrival of KGB officers, and the order to destroy all logs and recordings from that morning. Volkov's testimony matched the details in the declassified Ministry of Defense memos nearly word for word. The most damning document emerged in 2003, a handwritten memo from a senior Soviet official to the Chief of the General Staff, dated October 12, 1967. The memo explicitly states, "The incident involving Flight 04 must be attributed to crew error to avoid complications with civil aviation oversight and international aviation bodies." The official who wrote it has since died, but the document's authenticity has been verified by multiple historians. Not everyone accepts the missile theory as definitive. Some retired Soviet aviation officials maintain that the evidence is circumstantial and that the original crew error conclusion was based on sound analysis. They argue that the radar data could have been corrupted, that witness accounts were unreliable after so many years, and that the declassified memos may have been exaggerated or taken out of context. There is also debate about whether the missile detonated close enough to cause the observed damage. Independent explosives experts have noted that the S-75 warhead typically fragments in a specific pattern, and some of the wreckage photos do not perfectly match that signature. These analysts suggest that a combination of factors, including possible mechanical failure, could explain the crash without invoking a direct missile hit. Another uncertainty centers on intent. Even if a missile was launched, was it truly an accident, or was their negligence so severe it bordered on recklessness? The declassified files describe a targeting error, but they do not explain how a commercial airliner, broadcasting a civilian transponder code, could be mistaken for a practice drone. Some aviation historians believe that safety protocols were bypassed to meet ambitious testing schedules, effectively prioritizing military objectives over civilian safety. Finally, there remains the question of accountability. No individuals were ever publicly named or prosecuted in connection with the crash. The families of the victims received no acknowledgement, no apology, and no compensation beyond the standard state pensions. When journalists have pressed Russian authorities for further disclosures, the response has been that the matter is historically closed and that additional files remain classified for national security reasons. 66 people were on Flight 04 that morning. They were engineers traveling to a factory in Odessa, bureaucrats returning from meetings, a young couple on their honeymoon, and a mother with her 2 children visiting relatives. The crash left behind spouses, parents, siblings, and children who were told their loved ones died because of a pilot's mistake. For 30 years, those families carried the weight of that explanation. Some blamed the crew. Others questioned why experienced pilots would make such a fatal error in manageable weather. But without access to evidence or independent investigation, they had no choice but to accept the official story. When the truth began to emerge in the late 1990s, many of the survivors had already passed away. Those who lived to see the declassified documents described feelings of betrayal, anger, and a grief that reopened decades later. One daughter of a crash victim, Irina Voloshyna, spent years petitioning the Russian government for a formal acknowledgement and public apology. She collected testimonies, organized memorials, and worked with journalists to bring attention to the case. In 2012, a A small monument was erected near the crash site, funded by donations from the families. The Russian government sent no representative to the unveiling. Aviation accidents are rarely about a single mistake. They are almost always the result of a chain of failures: technical, human, and systemic. In the case of Flight 04, the chain included a poorly coordinated training exercise, inadequate airspace deconfliction, a malfunctioning or improperly configured targeting system, and a decision-making culture that prioritized secrecy over accountability. Think of it like a series of doors that should have stopped disaster. Each one was supposed to lock, but they were all left open at the same time. The cover-up reveals something deeper about how institutions handle catastrophic mistakes. When an organization fears the consequences of transparency more than the consequences of lying, truth becomes a casualty. In the Soviet system, admitting that a military exercise killed civilians would have invited scrutiny of air defense protocols, embarrassed powerful officials, and potentially damaged international perceptions of Soviet competence. So the lie was chosen, and it became official history for 3 decades. This case also highlights the fragility of accountability in closed systems. Without independent investigators, free press, or judicial oversight, evidence can be destroyed and narratives rewritten with impunity. The families had no legal recourse, no way to challenge the findings, and no platform to demand answers. The state was investigator, judge, and final authority all at once. The lessons extend beyond Cold War history. Even in democracies, military and aviation accidents sometimes involve delayed disclosures, incomplete investigations, or institutional resistance to admitting fault. The difference is that mechanisms exist, however imperfect, to eventually bring truth to light. Flight 04 is a reminder that those mechanisms, transparency and independent oversight, are not luxuries. They are essential safeguards. Here's what we know for certain. Flight 04 crashed on October 10, 1967, killing all aboard. The official story blamed the crew. Decades later, declassified documents revealed that a missile from a military exercise likely caused the disaster, and the truth was deliberately suppressed. What we don't know is the full extent of the decision-making that led to the launch, the identities of everyone involved in the cover-up, and whether additional evidence remains locked in archives. Now the question becomes, what happens next, more than 50 years later, when most of the officials are dead and the state that covered it up no longer exists? No further official investigation or acknowledgement is likely. The Russian government has shown no willingness to reopen Cold War-era cases, especially those involving military culpability. The legal and political incentives to revisit Flight 04 are effectively zero. More documents may trickle out through academic researchers, journalists, or archival leaks. As older files are digitized and restrictions expire, additional details about the missile launch, the immediate cover-up, and internal debates could emerge. These would add context but are unlikely to change the core facts. Families could pursue symbolic justice through international human rights forums or historical commissions, but enforcement mechanisms are non-existent. A formal apology or monument funded by the state is possible in theory, but there is no historical precedent for Russia issuing retroactive accountability for Soviet-era military mistakes. The most realistic outcome is that Flight 04 remains a historical footnote, a case study in cover-ups rather than a catalyst for justice. The families who sought answers have mostly passed. The officials responsible are long dead. What remains is the record, incomplete but undeniable, preserved for anyone willing to look. The truth about Flight 04 took 30 years to surface, and even now, pieces are missing. But the story endures as a stark reminder that silence, however official, is not the same as fact. If this story made you think about how institutions handle mistakes, you might want to watch our video on the nuclear accident that almost started World War III, which explores another Cold War incident where secrecy nearly led to catastrophe.